So welcome. I'm so glad to be on this call with all of you. And I just want to thank you, each and every one of you, for your interest in serving as an application assistant or prosperity center coach. So what we're going to share with you today is you're going to see a workflow of how our applicants move through this process. So at this point in time, we have already launched cycles of the fund, and we've had a lot of learning in this process. And so to make it really helpful for our prosperity coaches and our application assistants to understand how applicants work through the relief fund, we've prepared a helpful visual as a United Way workflow of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So the first thing that you'll notice when you look at this is there are 4 orange bubbles, if you will. And so these bubbles actually outline entry points of our overall process, where you can see how people first start. So the first thing that you'll see is we have a self-referral process. So this is for people who have not applied for a previous round of funding at all. So this is somebody who's maybe heard of the current round and they're going to just apply from scratch. And so the other thing that you'll note is that we're only asking for basic information from folks on this piece, because one of the pieces we learned when we first launched this fund is that not everybody was able to complete the application in an equitable way. So some people might not have had access to internet. Some people found the questions confusing or struggled with identifying what information they needed to provide. And so we want to make sure that this is a really equitable process. And so in partnering with you all to offer things like application assistance and prosperity coaching, we still need a way to collect people's initial interest or identified need for the fund. And so what we've done to handle that is we're allowing people to just apply up front. But the difference is they're not going to fill out a complete application. This first basic requirement is really going to be assessing their name and demographic information so we can at least start to put them into this process and think about how we can best support them. One of the things that's really important here at United Way Fresno Madera is that we really have a person-centered approach to everything that we do. And so we would be remiss if we just continued to fund people without really thinking about what it was that could really reach them and how we could manage this process in a way that really worked for them, regardless of where you are in life, regardless of what your struggles are with this fund. And so in addition to people initially completing a basic requirement and outlining their interest and need for this service in this fund, we really want to make sure that we're still collecting data to outline their need and to make sure we have basic contact information and understanding where they are without having them complete the full application. And that's where each and every one of you will come into play in providing that assistance. So the other point of entry, a lot of you know that United Way runs a 211 Helpline Hotline. So this helpline is really focused on offering 24/7 support 365 days out of the year. If any of you work for community-based organizations and you need to update your 211 profile, we welcome you to do that, because as programs come and go, as funding changes, it's really important that we continue to keep this information up to date. It's actually quite possible and quite likely that our 211 specialists right now are referring people to your organization. And really, our 211 call center data is only as good as the community in which we serve keeps it updated alongside us. And so one of the entry points for this relief fund is also maximizing that 211 hotline. And so when people call and maybe they outline a need for financial assistance and they've been impacted by the coronavirus or the shelter-in-place process, then the call specialist, anytime, day or night, either on the phone or via text message, will let people know about this fund. And then the other entry point that I want to highlight is previous applications. We knew that when a crisis or disaster hits, one of the key pillars is to move as quickly and expediently as possible. And so we knew that we were going to launch this fund start to finish as quickly as we could. And so that initial round was a $50,000 investment. We really tried to put a lot of thought into how we would do this and making sure that we would select people who were the most vulnerable following the CDC guidelines and looking at what other resources were available. And so one of the things that we decided was, as we move forward with future rounds, we don't want to lose all of those applications, right? We want to make sure, because we know behind every single application, there is somebody who is in need, who has been greatly impacted by this pandemic. And so we determined that going through future rounds, we would have a mechanism for accessing those people and letting them know, hey, we would like to consider you in this next round if you're still in need, and if you would still like to be considered for funding for the relief fund. And then the other thing that we realized through this process is that, the cash aid only goes so far. For a lot of people, this is really impacting their entire lives and possibly even beyond the shelter in place. And so we wanted to make sure that we're able to think through how we can fully wrap people in support so they can prosper. Hence the prosperity coaching piece of this work, to be able to look at how they can better budget, to access additional resources that they might not know about, like our PG&E assistance programs or services and programs from other community-based partners using our 211 database information. We want to get people connected. The other point of entry that I really want to highlight is through our community partners. And so one of the things that we have done is we've outlined a referral process. So we're inviting our community partners to help people apply for the funds, because we really are dependent on the community. We are not the largest community-based organization in the Central Valley or in Fresno, Madera, quite specifically. And we know that there are people every single day that actually focus on helping people apply to make sure that they're eligible for different programs, as well as we know that these community-based organizations know their people, they know their clients, they already have their information, and so helping them apply for this fund actually would be in their wheelhouse and help us continue to be very accessible. And quite frankly, we just don't have enough staff to help with all of the volume that we receive, and we really want this to be an equitable process. And so that's why we want not only the referrals, but the application assistance. So those are the 4 key entry points of how somebody who's applying for this fund actually can access the full application for the relief fund. So among all 4 of these entry points, they then filter down, as you will notice, to some basic referral and screening. So we're designing our application process to do some of that for us, right? So some basic eligibility would include things like living in Fresno or Madera counties. We serve Fresno and Madera counties, and so although we know that there's plenty of need in other counties and all over the world right now, we're very focused on those counties. That's our mission, that's our charge, and that's what our funders have donated to us to do that work. As well as we want to make sure that we're focusing on people who have been impacted by this pandemic, by the coronavirus, by shelter in place, somebody who perhaps has had no change in their life but was perhaps already in need may not necessarily be eligible for this fund. That's going to be a really critical, and has been a really critical eligibility factor, is that the questions around whether or not they're high risk, should they receive the coronavirus, of critical illness or even death, or whether or not they've lost their income of 100% or even over 50%, those things are going to be really critical, because those help us identify that applicants actually have been impacted by coronavirus and shelter in place. That's really the mission of this fund. And so then after applicants go through that basic referral process, and so you'll see we're not letting people just apply to the full application directly without any of these processes, because this really helps us pre-screen individuals to make sure that we're not setting up false expectation and that we're actually able to serve them. Because if somebody perhaps isn't eligible or the most vulnerable, we're still able to connect them to resources, even if they might not have access to our relief fund. And that really is the framework of our work, as well as it allows us to then look at what other work we need to do to fundraise, right? If there are certain niche populations that maybe we're not prioritizing as high risk or high need, but they're demonstrating to be a large impact, or we have an overwhelming application from that demographic, then we can look at how we adjust this process, or what other funds we need to raise to be responsive to everybody who has been greatly impacted. If I'm somebody who's applying and maybe I need a little help with the application, but overall when this is done, I know I have a job waiting for me, I don't have any other real needs, I'm not behind on any other bills, then great, I'll receive the assistance I need to apply for the fund, and then that will be the end of my process. If I'm somebody who maybe I'm really struggling, my employer has closed down, I'm not going to have a job to return to when this is all said and done, or as we sort of progress to a new normal, because we can't think of this as something that's ending and then things will go back to where they were. But as we move forward, if there's somebody in this process who maybe they're like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have a job when I return, what am I going to do? I have children, how do I access services and help? Then that person could look at receiving the prosperity coaching, and then their coach will assist them in applying for some of these additional services, finding gainful employment with our partners that are able to do that work. So we can really provide them with comprehensive support and intervention for their ongoing financial stability and prosperity of their life.